don't know if it's my imagination or not, but every time I talk about the haunting in South Carolina, that night when I get in bed, I feel something jump up on the mattress.
You are listening to Terror Signals, presented by Normal Paranormal. I am your host, Justin Bamforth. The gentleman you will be hearing from is a cybersecurity consultant from Houston, Texas. He has a daughter, a son-in-law, and a grandson, and one too many cats. Not that that's ever a problem, but most evenings, this individual can be found at a hockey bar, sipping whiskey, reading a book on his phone, or dominating with his pub trivia team. He plays Dungeons and Dragons, makes candles, and farms mushrooms. But not those kind, if that's what you're thinking. Now, as you can tell already, this individual is one very eclectic individual. But he's someone I've gotten to know over the years, and I really enjoy talking with him. Why? Well, he is an intelligent, honest, thoughtful, funny, and an overall interesting guy. But he has also lived through an extraordinary set of circumstances in 2008, which changed his life forever. And it was after that incident that I chronicled in my book, The Spectrum, which is how I initially contacted Lawrence Miller. Now, Lawrence Miller is not his real name. It's a pseudonym he provided for the book. But later on, Lawrence chose to reveal his true identity, which is Garrick Pass. And we'll be speaking with Garrick about his experiences living through that terrifying haunted ordeal, among other things. So Garrick, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so good to be here. And I have to say, as kind of an expert on this, you have this NPR vocal quality that is just striking. You really sound like you're keeping me up to on the goings of this American life, and I'm here for it.
Well, it is my honor and is my duty to present stories like yours with the audience. You know, there's a lot of people out there, I think, that will be able to resonate with your tale, with your experiences, and what you've learned about it. You know, that's the most important part. You know, you've grown from this. You didn't let it destroy you. You actually became stronger as a result of it.
It's an ongoing journey, really. But yeah, I'm thrilled to be here, and I love telling the story. I have only told it entirely, probably fewer than 10 times, and I think 2 or 3 times was to you. So the rest were in therapy. So, but bits and pieces come out at the pub occasionally and with good friends. But as for the whole thing, this is where it's going to happen.
Let's start off at the beginning of how you and I first connected. Do you remember that?
Was it over Twitter?
Yeah. I just set up my website, Normal Paranormal. And I remember putting a call out there on the internet for people to submit articles if they wanted. And you were one of those people.
I did that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's been so long. And we've interacted so many times since then, I forgot exactly how it was started.
Yeah, you sent me an article about the dangers of living in a haunted house, which when I read it, I found it extremely fascinating. But there weren't many details included in that original story. Yet I had this an inkling suspicion that there was a lot more to your story. And so I asked, and you agreed to share it with me one night. And you were rather reluctant at first, and I can understand why. But, you were reliving all of those moments as you were sharing them.
Yeah, and I do remember that. And, the process started when I started, seeing things in the house. I lived there with my ex-wife and my daughter. And my daughter was tweenish. But some cats, some other cats. But I started seeing things and really just thought I was going insane. So didn't have any real experience with the paranormal leading up to that. I mean, I liked horror movies as much as the next guy. But when I started seeing things, I really started to think that I was just losing it. And so I didn't tell anybody. And for, 2.5 years of it, I was the only one experiencing things regularly. And I really just thought I was going insane. So it took me a long time to come out and to say, hey, I'm seeing stuff that doesn't make any sense, and I realize it doesn't make any sense, and this is why I'm generally terrified all the time, and so now what do we do about it? And then part of the therapy for me has been, aside from actual therapy, has been telling the story in settings like this, so that I can get it out there and that's just in case anybody else is going through the same kind of thing. Um, then sometimes when I did paranormal investigations after I left the house, I sometimes the most valuable service you can provide is to tell someone, "Hey, you might not be crazy." Um, it's remarkably validating for someone who's in it. You know.
A lot of people tend to think that this is a fun experience because, Hollywood tends to embellish a lot of things, but Hollywood doesn't need to. These stories are so extraordinary and they're so bizarre. But we'll get into that. Let's take the audience through the timeline of events. You were in Texas and you got a job offer, right?
Right. I was going to be working for an insurance company in Columbia, South Carolina. My family was going to stay in Houston for a few months while I found a place to live. So I did a couple of months in like an extended stay hotel. It was miserable. I found this house on, I think, Craigslist or something. It was listed on there. Um, and it was just down the road from the hotel. And I said, okay, I'm going to go look at it. And I drove up to this house, and it was built in the early 80s, split level home, um, fairly modern on the inside. And this young couple with a brand new baby were looking to move to the other side of town so they could, reduce their commute. And I live in Houston, Texas, so it's not a commute if it's not 45 minutes, and there's no place in Columbia, South Carolina you can't get to in 45 minutes. So I was a little suspicious of that, just because there's no traffic there. But I liked the house. I missed my family, and I was like, okay, let's just do this. There was um, you know, the back half of the house was mostly glass, and you could see out the yard, and then over the hills, and there's this golf course. And I don't golf, but whatever. Um, and at the end of the day, I missed my family, so I bought the house, and uh, I went there the day I closed on it, and the other family had left, and they had left a lot of stuff in the house. They had left some furniture that they explained to me had been in the house since the beginning, like the first people that moved in there. And it was a pain to get it out the door, so they just left it, and everybody inherited this furniture. Um, and then the refrigerator, they couldn't, without taking the doors off, they couldn't get it out of the kitchen, so that ended up staying there. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff in the garage, and the attic, and one of the spare bedrooms that was related to like home improvement projects. A whole bunch of like new cabinets and gallons of paint and new blinds and stuff that was just left there. And um, when my family finally showed up from Texas with all of our stuff, my ex-wife walked in the front door and went, "Oh, oh no, oh no, this feels weird. I don't like this. This is terrible. I don't like it." And I was like, "No, it's fine. The walls are yellow, but we can paint that. It'll be okay. I know the wall paint is terrible, but we have a whole bunch of paint laying around here, so we can fix it." He was like, "No, it's not the paint. It's not the paint." Later on, she started to think it was the paint because it was really bad coloring yellow. But we got moved in, and then we started to notice things that were odd about the house. There was a finished room over the garage with a bedroom. That's where my daughter initially went, in the front bedroom with this bay window, and it's beautiful and everything. But um, one of the first nights in the house, she couldn't sleep because she kept hearing voices outside her window. Right. So I went into the bedroom and turned off the light, and I sat at the head of her bed and on the floor and listened, and I could hear, like, it sounded like whispering, and I thought, is it gravel on the road outside? Like, what is it? And then I realized we're on a cul-de-sac, and there's no traffic, and there's no, if gravel's not going to make noise on its own. And I couldn't explain it. And finally, we just moved her out of that bedroom into the finished room over the garage with her private bathroom, which is pretty sweet for a tween girl. She was fine after that. She didn't experience anything else in the house ever. That was it, the only thing.
So let me rewind a little bit here. When your ex-wife first came into the house, she said, "Oh no, no."
Right.
What made her get that feeling? I mean, did she have like a psychic ability prior to that?
She's always been a very spiritual person. She's Native American. She grew up doing a lot of the activities on the reservation, so I felt that she was more closely tied into the spiritual side than I was. I was, really trying to keep myself out of it. Yeah, I, I tend to lean towards science.
Is this the first time that you saw her like express this concern, or had you seen it before?
I had never seen her express that kind of heebie-jeebie moment. No, we talked about metaphysical things, and we, watched different programs and stuff, and she's one of the people that would burn sage to put positive energy into a space, and I was of the impression that it smells nice, so that's good. But at this time in my life, I was especially into um, verifiable, repeatable results. Testing, peer review. I need more evidence than my own eyes can provide.
Well, let me ask you this. Would it be safe to say that you were not interested in this topic prior to this?
Oh, I've always been interested. I mean, but from the standpoint of I love ghost stories. I love um, I love any story going back sociologically that we have told each other around a campfire. I think it's um, the bed of human interaction. I think that's where all of our interactions with each other start, is with those tribal stories that we tell each other to make ourselves feel better, to explain this weird, stupid world we live in. So since I was a kid, I've liked mythology and folklore and, like I said, ghost stories, vampire legends, all of that stuff. But from the framework of this is the way that primitive people explained weird stuff to each other. And I didn't take any of it literally. I remember as a kid, it was never a problem for me to run around a cemetery day or night and play with my friends. That wasn't ever something that was going to creep me out, because I wasn't into the spooky aspect of it. I was into the communications aspect of it.
So, apart from your daughter experiencing some strange stuff, those first few days, they weren't really like nothing jumped out at you, right? As like obvious, like, hey, there's something wrong here.
No, no. That took a couple of months of us being in the house, I think, before I started to really let myself see things. Um, and and it started with the occasional shadowy figure in the hallway. There was an L-shaped hallway that went from the front door and then around and then back to the master bedroom. And um, the room where my daughter heard the voices was on this corner, and she'd go like this. And this hallway, there's a little bathroom here, a little guest bath, and then the front door. And this hallway got no sunlight. There was no way we could light it. Right there, you had to turn on a light, and even then, it would be at an angle, and you couldn't ever fully light this hallway that had the washer and dryer in it. So I saw shadowy figures in there all the time, but it was also stupid dark, and it was easy for me to go, okay, no, that's just the door in the laundry room slightly open, and I'm going to walk right past that and go and do what I was going to do in the other part of the house. And that went on a little while, and then they started to get a little more vivid. And I guess um, it's almost like they were trying to get my attention, because then there were more than one, and I would see them in the hallway, and then for after a couple of months, there was this. I could sit in the living room, and there was this guy that would walk from that dark hallway across the atrium into the um, towards the garage, and he was not spectral at all. But he was a guy, and he was wearing a white sleeveless shirt and some type of uniform pants with a stripe down the leg. And every day around sunset, he would walk right through there. And I was the only one to see him. Occasionally, we saw the corner of my eye. Occasionally, he would just walk through. Didn't make a noise. Never did anything except pass through there. But I went and looked in the garage multiple times before I finally gave up. And like, I'm not going to find this guy. And I went up into the attic because I was thinking, okay, if there's somebody in the house and he's in the attic and he comes down the little stairwell up there and then goes across to the garage, but then the garage door's closed. There's nobody in there. A whole bunch of more home improvement projects in the garage, but there's no guy in there. Um, and eventually, I got to where I was so freaked out about it I couldn't be freaked out anymore, and that's when I started to. That's when I discovered my love of craft beer. So I noticed that if I drank enough, I wouldn't see the guy anymore. So, um, which is the opposite of what you'd expect. But I really this is not the way to handle this problem, right? But like I said, I wasn't talking to anybody about it. I wasn't there wasn't like a place you could go that was reliable that you could go, hey, I've got this problem. Please consider me not crazy. And it's better now, but still not great. Yeah, I would drink and then I would see less things.
When you first saw this guy, your very first impression of this guy, did you think it was a home invasion at this point?
I thought it was somebody. I had read a story on Reddit or something about this lady who was having food go missing, and she set up a camera in her kitchen, and she saw somebody crawl in from the crawl space under the counter and go to the thing. And I was like, okay, this is what's happening here. But then, a few minutes later, I'm like, why would he walk through? When there's somebody in the living room and it's sundown, and it's lit up, and there's people in the house. Why would he not sneak? So it didn't make sense that it was a living person. The first couple of times I thought that it was somebody, but we had enough people in for repairs occasionally that I would see workmen in and out, and I didn't always know what repair was going on. So it wasn't strange to see somebody I didn't know, but the same guy every day for months, and no repairs are being done in the house, and that he doesn't make any sound, and nobody else is seeing him was a little that yeah. There was a reason I started drinking. Um, I didn't have a I don't have an explanation for it, and I don't know. He was wearing part of a uniform of some kind, but whether it was American Revolution, Civil War, marching band, I have no idea. Um, I just remember, and it wasn't he wasn't in a hurry. He didn't look distressed or anything. He was just going from one place to another, and he did it every day.
Every single day. That's really interesting. And that kind of plays into the whole residual haunting aspect, right? Because we know that this is an aspect of paranormal phenomenon where a witness will see the same event play itself over and over and over like a recording.
Right.
And was this the first like visual thing that you encountered?
I think so. We had seen some. We had experienced some uh, other effects, but they weren't like a manifestation of a person or a light or a darkness or any of that stuff. We had some weird things in the house, but no, this was the first guy.
Did he ever look over at you?
No, no, it was like a VCR recording of a guy walking. I mean, it was the same, and I didn't ever try to stop him or stand in the way. I mean, I could have, but really, I was at this point. I thought I was going insane, and uh, I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to know more about this. I wanted it to stop, and I didn't have a resource to help with that. Yeah.
Did you talk with your ex-wife or your daughter about this?
Not at this point, no. It took 2.5 years of the three that we lived there for me to actually bring it up,
Wow.
which is, um, I mean, it wasn't fun for me, but I have to tell you and the listeners, this is not the way to handle it. You've really got to let someone know, because it ended up doing a lot of damage to me and to my marriage and to my family and to my liver. So, I would not recommend denial as a haunting mitigation strategy.
We know that there are diabolical forces at play. Some situations, not all.
Right.
And one of the MOs from these diabolical forces is to basically make you seem like you're going crazy, to push you over the edge, to ultimately destroy yourself.
And to isolate you from your family.
Yes, right. And so you're seeing little signs. Again, looking back on hindsight, this is kind of a little bit, there's a little bit more clarity here, but in the moment, you're not thinking this, right? You're thinking you're losing your mind, like you said.
Yeah, that was my thought. It made a lot more sense to me than hey, there's ghosts in the house, you know. And honestly, it still makes more sense to me than hey, there's ghosts in the house. And I've seen some haunted things. So because after I left the house, I got angry, and I wanted to know, at this point, okay, let's find that repeatable, verifiable, bit of evidence that proves I'm not crazy, or let me work at it until I know that I am. So I did some paranormal investigation after the house, but there I didn't do a lot. No.
Once you realize that drinking was kind of making these problems go away, all should be well, right? I mean, you shouldn't be experiencing anything else.
You'd think, but you you can't be drunk all the time, and that's the problem. There were whole parts of the workday when I was required to be sober. So, and when I started working from home, that was when I started seeing more things. And when I say my daughter never experienced anything else, and my ex wife didn't for a long time, they experienced other aspects of this. For instance, um, that guest bathroom right by the front door was always sticky, and no one ever used that bathroom. So, and we would mop it and scrub it and clean everything, and it was always slightly, every surface in there was slightly tacky, like you could touch it and it would come back with a little poppy noise, and it wasn't dirty, but everything was sticky, right? And then uh, in the kitchen tile was the same way, but that tile was probably installed in the 80s when they put in the linoleum or whatever. We need a new tile anyway. And then the little valve behind the fridge in the wall that feeds the ice maker broke. It's like $1.60 part or whatever. It broke and flooded the underflooring. So the insurance had to replace the tile, um, which they did with brand new laminate, which was also always sticky. And there was no reason for it. After we replaced the floor, it was always just slightly sticky. Um, and we lost a lot of electronics. We lost the TV, three or four DVD players, a couple of wireless routers, one from the cable company they were very upset about. And when they had electricians in to look at it all the time because it looked like there was a power surge, and they had one electrician came in and he used the little EMF detector or whatever wire tracer to trace along the floorboard to see where the wiring was and everything, because we were having a weird power draw at the house. Like every 10 minutes there was a massive amount of power that was pulled from the street to the house, and occasionally that was frying out a bit of electronics or whatever. Um, so he's tracing the wire and everything, and you know how they run from the plugs, and there's like and I'm not an electrician, but the wire comes into the room, it goes to the plug, and then it goes around and then to the next plug, and then around to the next plug, and it's pretty straight line, right? Well, in that room that my daughter had been in initially with the bay window up front, the opposite wall from that window had two plugs, and the wire ran up in a big loop inside the wall for no reason. It's like a waste of copper for one thing, and also there's no point in that. So he followed it inside the drywall with this little detector thing and was like, I don't why this works and it's up to code, but why is it like this? And I was like, I don't know. And then this was the guy who was like, he said, I have to call the power company. They're going to come in and they're going to look at this. And um, he was on his way. He said, I don't have any reason for this to not. Your fuse box is fine. Everything's it's a little old, but it's fine. You should definitely be able to use a DVD player without it blowing up. And then he was stepping out, and I said, well, maybe the house is just haunted. And he spun, and put his foot in the door and stopped it from closing, and said, no, I watch a lot of ghost TV, and this place is definitely haunted. And then he left. And I was like, well, nobody saw that. Then the power company came out, right? And they because This guy was working the stuff inside the house, and they were working from the street to the house. And there's a little box. I wish I knew that. I should have looked at the terms before I was telling this. Anyways, there's a little box that goes from the wire at the street to the wire to the house, and there's a junction, right? And so they opened this thing up there at the curb, and there's like 4 or 5 guys crowding around this hole and everything. I go over and look at it, and they're like, okay, this is not appropriate. This may be the problem, right? That between the street and the house, there wasn't a fuse or a block. There was a stack of washers, like that had arc welded themselves together. So it was a solid piece of metal, but like you're not really supposed to wire using a stack of washers. They're like, they'll do this temporarily, but then it's supposed to replace something that's been there for a long time. And we're going to replace it. It'll all be fine and everything. And he said, let's try and figure out what it is in your house that's drawing this power every 10 minutes. So we go room by room. They're like, turn off, this breaker. I'll turn off the power in one room, and then wait 10 minutes, and then there's another power surge. So they're like, okay, turn that back on, turn it back, turn this one off, and then 10 minutes. So we go through this for like over an hour. Every time we turn it off, there's still a power draw from somewhere, and he's like, okay, just turn off the master breaker. We're going to replace this thing, and then this block, and then we'll send out somebody to look at something. They never send anybody out, but anyways, 10 minutes with the master breaker shut, the house still draws power. And they're like, why would it do that? There's nothing, there's not a single spark in that house right now. There's no way anything in there is drawing power from the street every 10 minutes, because it is, and it's cut off because we're replacing this block of nickels thing. So, or washers. So like, that's another one that me and the ex-wife kind of just glossed over, and we're like, okay, well, this is one of those things we can't do anything about, so we're going to not think about it anymore. And again, ladies and gentlemen, don't do this. That's please learn from my mistake. This is not how we handle this situation. I don't know what the actual answer is. I just know that's not it.
That is remarkable to have professionals out at the house measuring for electricity, and there's no electricity, and yet they're still measuring it. Like, my goodness.
No, and that was the first guy that was like, hey, maybe your house is haunted. And I was like, okay, I'd been thinking that, but I had never said the word out loud. So maybe that electrician actually spoke it into existence. He was not the last person to come out and say something, though, because I continue to see things. Things continue to be weird as far as, we started looking into the history of the house, and it had been there since the 80s. And I knew it had been through a few owners, but I didn't know that it had been through as many as it had.
How many?
I don't do the math on it, but it was at least 8 different owners, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it sat empty for a lot of that time, and no one ever lived there longer than 2 years, ever, except we did. We were there for 3, which was the record, and a lot of these people had left in the middle of doing these home improvement projects, and had left this sedimentary layers of different projects they were doing, like in the garage and in an attic and stuff like that. So that was why all this stuff was left there for this home improvement projects, because they left in the middle of them. I think that's why some of the furniture stayed there. We left in the middle of the night when we did, and left most everything, just because we couldn't be in the house anymore. That's when when things had gotten that bad. They went super bad, super fast.
Yeah, and you mentioned that tacky substance, in certain parts of the house.
Yeah.
I don't think you brought it up, but what about like the wall color? Didn't you decide that you're going to paint the walls too, because it was that ugly?
We did. Yeah, and we painted the bedroom wall, which was that weird burnt yellow, like a powdery yellow. It was an awful yellow. But we painted over it with maroon, and we did 5 or 6 coats of maroon, and the yellow would bleed through it for some reason. Occasionally, you can see it, clear as day through the maroon paint. So paint's not supposed to work like that. We primered over it, and then maroon paint, and then yellows peeking through. And in certain light, the walls would look yellow anyway. There was just no overcoming it. But we didn't consider that to be paranormal. We thought that was just weird paint. You can rationalize away almost anything. The stuff that I was seeing on my own was crazy enough that the rationalization was, oh, well, you're losing your mind. But that's also another, you know, way to say that something's not haunted. You don't have to face this stuff and believe it if it's easier to believe that you're crazy. And it was easier for me to believe I was crazy.
Yeah, this is really crazy. Crazy. This is really unbelievable stuff, and yet it was happening,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that wasn't it. It, like you said, it got worse.
I was still drinking, but I don't know if it lends the story any credibility. I wasn't seeing or experiencing anything when I was drinking. It was only when I was sober. Um, so, well, I mean, if it was happening when I was drunk, maybe I should have noticed. I don't know. But uh, the one story that I do tell often from there is one early evening I went out into the backyard. Well, I went on the back deck to smoke a cigarette because I smoked at the time, and I was I was sitting on the railing looking over the backyard, which is fenced in, and there were these three little kids doing this ringer on the rosy thing in the yard, and they did this ringer on the rosy thing in the yard over the pool, and then around the side of the building, and I never saw them again, and the backyard was fenced in, and again they went over the pool, so. But I was in such a state at that point because it had been going on so long that I just stayed out there and finished my cigarette and then went back inside. I think something was trying to get my attention, and I was being really stubborn at trying to not validate it like that. So, um, and that was dumb. That was really dumb. I mean, we had pets just die. Um,
Really?
when yeah, we lost like two cats just for no reason. Totally healthy cats that just die. And then there was the thing with the spiders. Um, when they came in, when the subfloor flooded and they had to replace the kitchen flooring and everything, they went under there to replace that line. And the plumber went in. He opened the thing to the crawl space under the house and the little wooden door, and then he closed it again and then said, hey, you have to have an exterminator out to spray under here because there are tens of thousands of what's the spider? Brown recluse. There were like tens of thousands of them on every corner of the rafters under the house and everything. And those are solitary spiders, right? That's why they call them recluses. They don't nest up and they don't come together in tens of thousands of them. So they had to tent the whole underneath the house and spray before a plumber could get in there safely and do anything. But I looked and there were webs in every corner. They aren't even really web building spiders. They just kind of, little tiny triangles and then each one of them had a, venomous spider in it. And I'm not a spider guy.
Yeah.
But to know we were living over thousands of them was a lot.
Oh my gosh.
And that kind of stuff just kept happening. And
Oh,
I keep remembering different little things that I would see in flashes, and you know eventually all of this became actually dark, and I started to see worse things. Um, I guess my stubbornly trying to pretend it was all in my head was an escalation on its own way. So uh, started to see these little beings around the house, different places. They were always um, watching me. but there were 4 or 5 different ones that I saw pretty regularly. These weren't human creatures; they were differently shaped and pretty vivid, pretty active. They were always doing something. My sleep had started to deteriorate.
How did that first emerge? Because that's not something you hear about on a lot of these, typical hauntings, right? You don't hear about these creatures. So you first off, you see this human being,
Right.
you see these kids,
Yeah.
now you see these creatures.
Shadowy forms, and then the creatures. Yeah. So the main one that I would see was this little 2 to 3 foot tall reddish guy, bulbous nose, big eyes. If he was wearing clothes, I don't remember them being clothes. I remember he had like bird feet. He looked kind of cherubish body type, but he was red. He was solid red. Um, and he would just stand places and smile at me, and not in a kind way. Um, he was the announcement of, hey, you need a drink, for a long time. Um, and he was the one that I saw the most often. I saw him for probably a year and a half before anybody else did. Um, and I never tried to give him a name or talk to him or befriend him. Um,
I just want to put this out to the audience. At this point, you're still thinking that you're losing your mind, right?
oh, I've got so much evidence I'm losing my mind. Yeah, that's something that makes sense.
So when you see this creature emerge, again, you're not thinking, oh, this is paranormal. You're thinking, oh, great, this is just more evidence that I'm going crazy.
Yes, exactly. And look, it's conclusive now. This thing isn't even real. So I'm seeing him in the kitchen regular like. He's in the master bedroom most of the time, um, more often than not. Um, and I'm trying to ignore him because he's, to me, evidence that I'm just losing it. So, yeah, he wasn't alone. There was a big bone white figure with like insectoid features who would hang out occasionally. He was more in the living room area. This little green guy.
About how tall were these creatures?
So the red one was 2 to 3 feet. The big bone colored bug creature was 7.5, 8 feet.
Really? Whoa.
Green guy was about 4 feet, and I didn't see them that often. My ex-wife ended up seeing them more often than I did. The red guy seemed to really concentrate on me, but yeah, um, that was a really dark time. I mean, I could talk about the soldier that would march in front of my door, and I could make jokes about that. I could talk about the kids in the backyard. I only saw them that one time, but um, that's kind of it's kind of creepy. It gives me chills to think about. But I saw it and then hung out for a little while to see if it would happen again. Shadow figures, everybody sees those. These things were, just 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 messing with me, and um, and it was I had to actively ignore in order to just get through.
Yeah, and even just hearing your story now and seeing your reaction, I mean, folks, this is someone who really lived through this, and I can tell you still have that part in your mind where you're still in disbelief. Did this really happen?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's hard for me to talk about it. A lot of the times, if it comes up, I'm like, okay, hey, if you need to know this story, I don't want to talk about it, but here's a book, and I'll hand them the Spectrum. See if you can guess which chapter I'm in, because the story's in there.
Yeah.
If you get questions, come back to me. I'll address them. But this story is real hard for me to tell because in telling it, feel as crazy as I felt back then. And I'm not saying I'm not crazy. I've got my own share of crazy, but I do think that this was not part of that. This is not a symptom of that. And it took me a long time to find a therapist, right? Because usually I would go and they'd be, okay, well, some mild psychosis. We'll address that with, no, 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 hang on. Why don't we pretend for the next 50 minutes that this actually happened to me? How do I recover from it? I ended up having to find a shrink that specialized in PTSD. And they're like, okay, I don't, doesn't matter what the event was. Let's just give you some tools to cope with it. And then, you know, and here's a space where you can talk about it and how your day's going and all. And that's what I ended up needing. But man, letting it get that bad, I mean, it's it was so bad that I literally have, uh, so your adrenal gland like pumps adrenaline into your system when you're scared, and that widens your blood vessels and increases your heart rate and lets you use oxygen more efficiently and all that kind of stuff. And then it also hits your amygdala in the brain, right? And the brain processes that as, hey, you should be afraid right now, right? So um, when I finally had an MRI done, a few years after leaving the house, the amygdala portions of my brain were entirely calcified. They've been firing nonstop for like 3 years. So there was nothing. They just don't pick up that anymore. I can still get startled. I can still, I have social anxiety. I've got that kind of stuff. But for the actual creeping dread part of it, that doesn't. I'm burned out on that. I don't have that anymore. That's why that was one of the reasons I was really into ghost hunting after I left, was because I could go and I could see, is there something in here that's scarier than what I went through? And I've seen some scary shit, but it doesn't process the same way anymore for me. And I don't know if that's going to get better. But it's caused me to have to think about everything, right? Because if you don't have basic fear functionality, then you're going to, there's a chance I could make a really horrific decision because it's not tempered by my unwillingness to do something stupid dangerous. So I have to think, okay, am I going to walk downstairs and get a bottle of water today because, I could injure myself? Is that a reasonable fear? No, it's not. I'll go get the water. And then, am I going to crawl into this cave alone after dark? That's probably a little scarier than I should be doing. So no, let's not do that. And I have the whole overthinking thing. But so living in a haunted house for a long period of time can be transformative. But a lot of it's not as fun as that haunted mansion ride.
The way you're describing these creatures,
Yeah,
it makes me think, especially like the one that had kind of like insect like features, and then this what do you call a green guy.
yeah.
First thing that jumps into my mind is the alien entities.
I you know I, there's a lot of similarities there. I do think that whatever it was, like whether it was extraplanar or extraterrestrial or infernal or whatever, I think that it was the house was on its own profoundly haunted, and these creatures were drawn to that. Um, and I don't know if they were powered by it or interested in it, or if they were enjoying watching me spiral into insanity, or not spiral and think I was spiraling into insanity. Whatever, it could be amusing. Um, I just I don't know. And since that was the breaking point for me of, okay, I actually lost it, I may as well just try and see if I can get through life as a crazy person. That's when my ex-wife saw one of them. So I was working from home, and I had a desk at the towards the foot of the bed, master bedroom, and I would get up super early to log in and do whatever nerdy computer crap it is they do, and then my ex-wife would get up and pull her laptop onto her lap and take care of morning correspondences or whatever else she was doing online, while the room's still you know slowly gathering daylight. It was that early in the morning, and so one morning she she wakes up, she gets the laptop, sits down, and she's working on her stuff, and then she just curses. There's a string of profanity from the bed, and I look over and I go, "Hey, what's going on?" And she said, "I just saw this little guy by the nightstand, and he was red." And I was like, "Oh yeah, big nose, yeah, big eyes, bird feet, yeah, no, yeah, he's a thing." And I went back to work immediately without processing this at all, because we were both in shock, right? I mean, she had just seen something. I had just dismissed it as normal. And then at the same time, I was processing, okay, this thing is real because I'm not the only one that's seeing it now. Maybe I'm not crazy. And that means the whole paranormal exists. And the whole paranormal exists. And maybe this other thing I saw is not crazy. Maybe it's too early in the morning for me to drink. So, but we had to come to terms with the fact that there was stuff going on in the house that we couldn't explain and it didn't make sense and that we were both seeing. And we had some very open and honest and confusing conversations for the next few weeks while she continued to see. As soon as that happened, they were more interested in her than they were in me. And she had me smudge the house, right? And I gotta tell you, the sage smells nice. It does. But, certainly at the time, I did not have the spiritual chops to pull that off. And if you don't have the spiritual chops, all it did was piss everything off. Everything got way worse after that. I didn't know what I was doing. I was still on the fence about believing in any of this nonsense. And I was just walking around with an abalone shell and a flaming, stack of sage like an idiot. And that just made everything worse. And then she should have probably done it, but she said, they've been messing with you longer. I was like, I don't care. Anyways, so yeah, she started to see those things. So, and it's funny. I don't know if it's funny. I mentioned the big glass window in the back of the house. Well, so the master bedroom was the center for activity for these little guys, right? So, and the big guy, they would hang out in there. They would make noise. Sometimes we couldn't see them. Sometimes we'd hear them, but at night we got into this pattern where we were trying to go to sleep and there would be some kind of noise in the room and she's still coming to terms with, hey, this place is messed up and I don't know how to fix it. I was like, oh, just here, have a beer. So when she would get up, finally she'd lay there for 15, 20 minutes and be like, no, I can't do this. And she'd go into the living room and turn on the TV and sit on the sofa. And then she said she could see in the glass reflection in the door, she could see these little creatures moving around on the sofa behind her in the reflection of the glass. And to her credit, she would get up, close the curtains, and then go and sit back down on the sofa so she couldn't see them. I mean, she knew they were there, but she would sit there and she would watch. We got a lot of stuff from the Home Shopping Network during that time period. It was a dark time for credit cards. But
so wait, so she just shut it like it was like no big deal, like it's.
She just didn't want to see it. If she couldn't see it, then it didn't matter, So she'd just sit back on the sofa, watch some more TV. Yeah, it was pretty badass, honestly. I mean, really, that's gangster. But it's also another symptom of the fact that we were both so deeply in denial about the whole situation that the idea that closing the curtains on it is a solution. Yeah, pretty bad.
We have all this activity taking place in the house. We have all this activity taking place outside of the house.
Right.
What about your neighbors? Did you have discussions with them? I mean, what was that like?
None of the neighbors wanted to get to know us. Okay, so the neighborhood was a little weird. It was on this cul-de-sac, Columbia, South Carolina, that Dave Thomas built for Wendy of Wendy's. So her house was across the street from us. She didn't live there anymore. There was a historical marker, I think. But he built this whole cul-de-sac. And the first year we were there, the house next to us on the right was struck by lightning and partially burned down. And then 2 doors down on the left, that house was raided by the feds. They had like 20 people that were being human trafficked in the basement. They were
Oh
doing,
my gosh.
yeah, I think it was a bunch of Vietnamese ladies that were being made to work at an illegal laundromat. Um, so, yeah, strange neighborhood. Um,
But you didn't see any of this when you first moved in, right? It seemed like a great picturesque place. I mean, you
it
sent me
did.
photos of the property. The house is beautiful. The neighborhood looks okay. And yet there's this hidden history behind it. And
Yeah, I mean, you never know what happened on the land that you build on, right? I mean, we built this whole country on Native American burial grounds, so a lot of our problems are self-inflicted, I'm sure. But I don't have any idea what happened there. But there's something really wrong with that entire part of the world, honestly. South Carolina, we have too many Carolinas. But I think in that particular case, it's a weird pocket neighborhood. It's a single cul-de-sac that sticks out into this golf course that I would walk across for trick or treating, but no other time. Um, and then so it's kind of isolated in a way, because there's a main road that cuts through town, and this is one branch off of it that if you're not going to those houses, you have no reason to be there at all. So there's no traffic. It's very quiet. Not a lot of kids. Mostly older families. But there's only 8 or 9 houses in the whole thing. So and you're really literally not connected to anything, which I think it makes it a target for this kind of activity.
but did you have any discussions with any of the neighbors about who lived there before? Because you mentioned there were unfinished projects in parts of the house, things that had been left behind, almost like people left in a hurry.
Right.
Did you reach out to them and try to get any answers?
I would occasionally talk to the neighbors that had the house struck by lightning. They were a delightful little couple. They were surprised that the couple that was there before us with the baby had moved out. They didn't know. They were like, "Well, they just moved in. I don't know why they'd move out." But that's they had mentioned that people move out, all the time. So she said we would have come over and welcomed you to the neighborhood, but people come in and out of the house all the time. So we didn't figure we'd get the opportunity. Um, it was after we moved out that we did the actual research on the house and found out that no one had lived there longer than 2 years. My daughter was going to public school there, and oddly enough, her teacher saw her dress and said, "Oh, I used to live in that house in the '80s," and and just said, "Let me know if you need anything." And then that was all we ever heard from her about that. She didn't talk about it at all, but she was one of the owners of the house in the 1980s.
And it wasn't that old of a house either. I think it was built in the 80s as
It
well.
was built in the 80s. Yeah, I mean, it was architecture's screaming 80s, but yeah, it wasn't an old house. It was in not as good condition as it should have been for a house that age. But then when you get people moving in and out all the time, and it sits empty between those times, that ages a house pretty quick too.
And I don't think I've ever asked you this before, but what about like anomalous lights in the sky over the neighborhood? Dare I say UFOs? Were there any reports of that?
Um, there were frequently lights, but there's also a military base there. Fort Jackson, I think, is right there. So generally, I think it's Fort Jackson. I don't know. There's one in Columbia, South Carolina. Um, Most people dismiss those as something going on at the military base. Um, it wasn't a big hub for air traffic or anything, um, but there's frequent cloud cover, and you could see glowing instances over the clouds occasionally. Um, Nights were usually very pretty, but uh, anything that was like that, if I could discount it as, oh, this is some kind of military or whatever, then that's what it is. There was one place in the highway actually where um, there was a stretch of about 2 miles, maybe it's I-40, I don't know, right outside of Columbia, where GPS would just stop working. It would just tell you were somewhere else or nowhere, for about 2.5 miles, where it's just not, the GPS doesn't work. And that was explained to me as, oh, well, they do survival training in the woods out here, and so they blocked all that. I don't know if that's a thing you can actually do. It might be, but and wouldn't you want to have GPS available in case there's an accident out in the woods during survival training? I mean, not surviving survival training is kind of failing it. So I just, yeah, that's and you get that from the interstate. You don't have to go in the woods to have that happen.
Which interstate was this?
I think it's 40.
So Route 40 or Highway 40 out there around Columbia, South Carolina, there's a 2 mile stretch where there is no GPS. That's pretty remarkable.
Looks like it's 20. I-20.
I-20. Okay.
I thought it was 40. 40 doesn't, maybe it didn't go that far. Okay, anyways, yeah, it's 40. It's, yeah, out towards Elgin, Camden area. Somewhere out there. There's a big military base that's south of that, and then there's an area right there where it just doesn't, um, the GPS doesn't work.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I'm glad I asked this question. And the reason I ask it is because there seems to be, well, as you know, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of crossover between what we call ufology, what we call parapsychology, what we call metaphysics, Bigfoot, whatever.
Huge fan of that guy.
So when you're describing some of these experiences, even though on the surface to most it seems crazy, far-fetched, like something straight out of a sci-fi book, it doesn't to me. It actually does make sense. And with some of the things that you struggled with as you're enduring these experiences, yeah, it makes sense. It's almost like a perfect case study for, dare I say, demonology, which you and I have kind of talked about,
Yeah.
this certain aspects. But at the time when I brought that up to you, you didn't want to elaborate too much. You had your own thoughts about it, about what these things could have been. Asking you several years later, are you more willing to discuss that theory?
I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And I think in terms of, because I've been doing more research into that topic in my own ghost hunting, and I just enjoy reading about this. Other people who may or may not be crazy like me. It fits a pattern. Like there's an escalation that happens in these events where it starts out kind of mild. You get isolated from your family. You start to doubt your own sanity. You move into behaviors that are risky or problematic, and then by the time you really need help and you're too deep in, you look like a crazy person, and no one's willing to help you. All of that fits into what happened to me. Now, what that means as far as like, is it a demon? Is it an alien? Is it, I don't know. Um, but if that's whatever we're calling it, I feel like it's not Bigfoot because he would not do that. But Bigfoot's a good guy. Um, I just think there's yeah, I've had conversations with people in all walks of life about this, and my Jewish friends are like, okay, well, that looks like a Torah appropriate demon, right? That's what they look like. And then we had a priest at the house after the saging didn't work. Yeah, we had a priest at the house, and the priest was like, "Hey, have you considered moving back to Texas?" It was just, he. There was a thing where he couldn't do an exorcism because we weren't Catholic, and then we had a rabbi in, and that was real weird because he went to rabbinical school with my rabbi from Texas, so they knew each other. And I was like, okay, well, maybe don't tell Rabbi Todd about this. But he said that there was definitely something wrong with the house. He didn't know what it was, but as a Reformed Jew, we tend to lean away from the mysticism and move into more practices of faith and that kind of thing. And we're trying to get away from the whole medieval witchcrafty, all of that. It's a bad look, and people hate Jews enough. So it was too much. So he couldn't do anything about it either. And I don't know that I've wanted someone to come in and do anything about it. But the advice from both of them and from that early on electrician was, "Hey, move out." And for a while, we were afraid that because people talk about entities following you and things like that. And if they were really as into screwing up my life as they seemed to be, that seemed like a possibility. So we thought, well, is moving going to really make anything any better? Um, and it wasn't until we had to move that we did. But
So you guys talked about moving.
we did.
At what point was this brought up?
We started talking about it after she started seeing things. She started seeing stuff, and she was like, "Hey, we still have that house in Texas. Let's go." And so I was working remotely at the time for a bank, and I was like, "Okay, I'll go back to Texas. That's great." We never really got traction in South Carolina as far as a social group or anything like that. I still have some friends that I talk to, but it's we didn't have an active social life there or anything. My daughter didn't have a lot of friends. Like, the problem with a small town is that everyone's got their friends when you move in, and then they don't really need new friends. Um, so, and we had friends here in Houston, so we thought we'll just go back to Houston. And then so I tried to quit my job, tell them I was moving back to Texas, and they were like, "Okay, you know what? You can just work remotely from Texas. Don't worry about that. We'll give you a week off to move and all that stuff." It was very nice. It was very nice. Thank you, Bank of America. But then we were putting it off for a little while because we wanted to get everything packed and done and moved, and we had a bad experience moving over to South Carolina because we used professional movers that were very unprofessional. So we wanted to do it ourselves, like U-Haul, all that kind of stuff. And then uh, one evening, I was. This is the hard part to tell, right? I mean, this
is the hard part, yeah. And I just want to pause for a moment there, because if this gets too intense for you, we can certainly stop. We can revisit this. I just want to stress to the audience who's listening here, this is tough. This is very difficult. And I can see, when I interview people, I can see it on their face when they've truly had an experience. I can see it on their face when they're, pulling a hoax on me. What happens is people get very emotional because they're reliving it. It's hard to process, because you're not just enduring it, you are surviving it. And in the case with you, Garrick, you were fighting for your life. I mean, this was a situation that had culminated to a point where you weren't sure if there was going to be another day, right? I mean, this is a pretty intense situation.
I thought I was going to die. Okay, so and when I tell the story again, my chest gets all tight and I get all tense and flitchy. So I'm just get through it.
Here's another thing that we can do too. Since this is not a live show,
okay,
we can also talk about something else, and then we can revisit this.
I want to get through it. Okay, we're gonna muscle through this, listeners.
All right, here we go.
All right, so it's typical evening. I'm laying in bed. My ex-wife's next to me. There's 15 minutes of weird noises, and she goes, "Oh, screw this!" And she gets out of bed and she goes to the living room to do her thing with the curtains. I'm laying in bed, and I'm listening to the room. I'm hearing this tick, 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 tick noise, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. Right? Is it the vents shifting? No, probably not. Tick, 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 tick. Is it maybe the chain from the blinds. No, there's no breeze in here. It's not. I don't know. Tick, 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 tick. Could it be something in the master bath, like a drip of water? No, because it's happening with a pause in the middle, and that doesn't make any sense. Tick, 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 tick. And I'm actively ignoring it. And then, you know how if you've got a pet or a small child, I assume, and you're laying in bed and the animal gets on the bed and you can feel the mattress move?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
can feel a little depression. Okay. So I feel that, the foot of the bed. I think it's one of the cats. Thought it was a cat. Thought it was a cat.
That's a welcoming experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to be alone. We're going to figure this out together, girl. And then, something scrambles up my body and presses itself down on my face. And that's not typical cat behavior. And it does not feel or smell like cat. And it's pressed my face or my head down into the pillow and I can't breathe. And it's just latched itself onto my head. And I can't breathe. And my arms are pinned to my side for a little while. And I really, I'm struggling. I can't move. I finally get my right arm out, and I just start punching the thing, right? And it was not a cat. Okay, it was there, right? Because first of all, it was there because if it had not been there, I would have been punching myself in the face multiple times. Secondly, it was not a cat because it was not hairy; it was scaly, and you know how when you pet a dog or a cat and you feel the ribs through the fur and everything? Every time I would punch, I would feel the ribs moving under that scaly skin. And I punched and punched and punched. And eventually it scrambled off the left side of the bed, went somewhere else, and I sat up and just screamed. Like I'm not ashamed to say I just screamed. Um, and my ex-wife ran to the room and said, "What's going on?" And I got out of bed. I was breathing hard. I had started to, my vision had started to go black around the edges. It was on my head that long. Um, and I staggered out onto that back patio and just smoked half a pack of cigarettes, sitting there trying to figure out what now. I mean, this has escalated to the point where, I could have been killed. Um, so we called the kid that mowed our lawn and got some of his friends to come over and load whatever they could into a U-Haul truck, and we left. And we did not look back.
Was
Um,
it that night that you packed up?
we were gone 2 days from then. It was we stayed in the house 2 more days, just to get the U-Haul booked and to get everything in it.
Okay, so how do you stay in a house for 2 more days after that? I mean,
You know,
that's 2 nights, right?
there's yeah no it was
Where
super
do you
dumb.
sleep?
I slept where I slept every night. And part of it was I didn't want this thing to beat me, and part of it was just stupid stubbornness, and part of it was a continuing disbelief in the paranormal. Like I really wanted this to not be a thing. I wanted it to not impact my life. I wanted it to not have massively changed, uprooted my family, caused all this trauma. You know, I wanted for that to not be the case. That didn't work out that way. It was obviously the case. Um, but it gave me 2 days where I could go, okay, this hasn't beaten me. And looking back on it, it absolutely beat me. That's It was never even a question. It was not much of a competition, honestly. I wasn't even playing most of the game. So, um,
In those 2 days, did anything else transpire?
no, it was quiet. Nothing happened after that.
I know looking back on it, you would think that that's foolish, but you know what? That may have been the smartest thing for you to do because you're kind of taking control of that situation. You're empowering yourself. You're
Yeah,
putting, some sort of, well, for lack of a better descriptor, some sort of positive energy back into what would otherwise have been a negative experience, right? If you had fled that night, it would have won, but you said no.
I fought back finally. after
That's right.
3 years. Fought back.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah.
That's amazing. I think that takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength, and that just shows your character too. You are a survivor on many levels. So that was a remarkable. That's probably the best part of the whole story that you've told me.
Well, that's a new angle on it that I hadn't considered before. So thank you for that. These talks we have, they're therapeutic, man. They are.
Well, that's what, when I start up conversations with experiencers, I always tell them, as I've told you, it's not just one conversation where you tell me about your experience. It becomes a lifelong friendship, and it's an ongoing conversation because there's different things we could think about as we learn more about the phenomenon and the mystery. We can talk about that, right? We
Right.
can process these things. You'll never be alone again because I'm here for you. Other people listening to this show are here for you. You don't have to worry about that, And that's why I love how the phenomenon kind of connects us together.
It's a weird support group, but it works.
It is, yeah. And when we get into the negative aspects of these types of cases, one of the things that I've seen and that I've learned from how this stuff operates is it feeds on fear. So it's like the more you stand your ground and you say, look, I'm not going to let this beat me,
Right.
the more empowering it is for you. And you've proven that. I mean, because you were on the verge of death and yet you stayed in the house. That's
And before that,
amazing.
I had become less able to be frightened by it,
Yeah.
chemically, literally, as it turns out, which is when they turned their interest in my ex-wife, which I think is also interesting. But you're right; they do feed on that fear, and I was neck deep in it for years, so I was a buffet.
And the other aspect that is also very interesting is, shifting away from you was your daughter. It didn't it seemed to have left her alone when you moved her to that other part of the house, right?
Right, right, it did, and I don't know if that was because possibly that part of the house was not part of the original construction, or um, it was just separated. You know, it was really off on its own. Um, so yeah, she was okay. The cats that survived spent most of their time in that room um, with her. So they would occasionally come in. They avoided the master bedroom most of the time because that was a hotbed of activity. But yeah, that seemed to be a sanctuary area.
You mentioned your faith earlier in the discussion. Are you still strong in your faith today?
Yes. People ask if I'm practicing Judaism, and I say no. I have perfected it. I'm actually fasting tonight. Um, it's a day when we look back on all the terrible things that happened to the Jews, so I can eat food again tomorrow at sundown. Um, but yeah, no, I'm still practicing. It got real weird for me to go to temple after the divorce because it was a place I went with my family and they weren't around anymore. So it was strange for me to go. And then we also had an issue where they traded out having off-duty police officers at every service to having a private security firm at every service, and it became depressing that they needed to have either of those things at every service, which kind of distanced me from uh, the faith for a bit. But I've been, the pandemic opened up a lot of stuff. I did a lot more research, a lot more reconnection. I looked into some of my own Irish history. I looked into, I got really into that mythology, that storytelling. Uh, Traveled there a few times with family.
That,
Uh,
that's right. You mentioned you went to Ireland with your dad.
I did, I did. And for paranormal investigators, I have to tell you this hashtag life hack. um, when I would go to these haunted pubs with my dad, because this is the first time my dad had ever been to a pub with me. Right, I was in my late 40s. Right, my dad had never been to a pub with me, and I'm good at pubs. I can do a pub. Um, don't know anybody. I'm going to leave with half a dozen friends. That's how you do it. So my dad and I get off the plane in Dublin, and we drive to Kilkenny, and then we go to this pub called the Field, and it's me and my dad and the bartender, the only people in the building. And I'm like, okay, we're doing this. So um, I know the quickest way to make friends in Ireland is to order a shot of Jameson and a Guinness. They're like, okay, you get it. All right, there you go. But if you ask the bartender, you don't ask him if the place is haunted. Um, that the life hack is ask him, hey, how haunted is this place?
Aha.
And then you just assume it's haunted. And then I'm hearing stories about silverware flying around and stuff upstairs, and it was great. Every place we went, there was a ghost story. It was fantastic. And then Dad did this gin and tonic tour of Ireland, which was really strange, but that's what they were doing. So he drank his way, and I got ghost stories the whole way. And then the cute thing is, when we got back, a couple of weeks after we got back, I get this T-shirt in the mail from Dad, and it's the Field pub on Patrick Street, Kilkenny, Ireland. It's got this little logo of a clock tower on it, and I was like, "This is awesome." Dad got this shirt, so I called Dad and I go, "Hey, Dad, I got the shirt. I love it." And he said, "Yeah, they don't actually sell T-shirts." So I went online and designed that one and had it custom printed. And I was like, "That's even better."
That's amazing. That
I
is
love that. I
amazing.
wear that shirt all the time. Yeah.
Jeez. But then you also went back, right, with your mom.
I went back with my yeah. So after my dad and I got back, the world ended, and we couldn't go anywhere for a while. And then I went last July to my niece's wedding, and my mom is at the table with us, and she says, "So, you took your dad to Ireland. When are you taking me?" And I was like, "Oh, Mom, I'll take you whenever." And she's like, "Book it." so, so I'm like, "Okay, I'll book it." And then I get home, and Monday she emails me, or she texts me. She goes, "Did you book it?" I'm like, "Oh, damn it. Okay, now I have to do this." So yeah, I booked it. And Mom and I didn't do the pubs, right? We did some pubs. But mostly, like, I was like, "Okay, Mom, I want to do this archaeological tour of Ireland." She's like, "Okay. And I want to see all these ancient pagan sites. I want to see all the haunted. I want to see all the grisly, murderous, like, whatever. I want to see all of the darkest parts of Ireland." She's like, "Let's do it." She's like, "What size pants do you wear?" And I tell her, and then, like, the next day, like, a set of hiking pants show up, and I'm like, "What's a hiking pant?" But it's got padded knees, and it's like this rip resistant material, and I'm like, "I've got hiking pants now." She's serious about this. So so we do uh, we went to land in Dublin. We did the standard touristy stuff in Dublin, and then we just head into the wilderness. Right, we went to um, the Hill of Tara, and then we go to, and this is weird, but there's this place called Rough Common, and it's this ancient royal festival site. They didn't have a city there because they didn't have cities at the time. This is Iron Age stuff. Right? So this is a big mound. It's covered in sheep now, but they're trying to get it made a UNESCO World Heritage Site or whatever. So, and I know that I want to go there because, like a quarter mile from the top of that, there's this cave called Owenigal, which is the Cave of Cats, and that's where the Morrigan lives, right?
Okay.
Okay, so the Morrigan is this Irish goddess in the sense that they can have goddesses. It's not really, she's one of the two ethnic. Anyways, so she, Druid, she's fierce feminist, protector of the home, but she's also the chooser of the slain. So, like, if there's a battle, she decides who lives, who dies. So she gets kind of a bad rap, but she's also like a psychopomp. So she's one that ushers a spirit or a person or whatever from one world to another, and they've got a few. Usually, it's living and dead in this culture, but in that one, it's reality to Tir na Nog or whatever. Um, Life to afterlife, the whole thing. And she supposedly lives in this cave of cats, right? And uh, the story is that on October 31st, on Samhain, um, all the monsters from Tir na Nog can come out of this cave and roam the countryside, and that's where people dress up so that they don't get taken, and that's where Halloween comes from. So the whole idea of this cave is that this is the cave in the middle of Ireland where Halloween comes out of, right? And it came to the States, and we candied it up and made it adorable. But this was a time of year when people were terrified of the monsters that come out of this cave. So I'm like, I want to go to this cave. And then I find this tour where you can not only go to the cave, you can go in the cave. And so I'm like, hey, Mom, I booked it. We're going in the cave. And she's like, I'm not going in the cave. I was like, fine, okay. So I'm wearing my hiking pants. I'm going in this cave. I get this little LED headlamp thing. I get plastic clothing that I can wear because it's supposed to be muddy in there. And we show up at this little tour guide place, and Daniel Curley shows up, and he's supposed to be our tour guide. And I'm like, oh, this guy's drunk. But he was not. I was mistaken. He was only Irish. And then we pile into this little truck. Mom's in her 70s, so we get to sit up front. It was pretty sweet. But then we go out there, and we see the hill, and we go to the cave, and you got to look this thing up, right? It's I think I'm wearing the T-shirt from it, like right now. But anyways, you go in, and there's this this druidic writing, this Ogham script on the side of the cave, and then you go in about 20 feet, and then it takes a 90-degree turn to the left, and then goes down into this little area, right? So he's like, he tells us the story of the Morrigan and where Halloween comes from and all this kind of stuff. And I actually looked him up after we left, and he's there's a National Geographic article about this place, right? And he's quoted in the article. This guy's like the expert on this particular archaeological site. We were very lucky that he was there. But he's like, who wants to go in? And I've got my headlamp on, and I'm pulling on my plastic pants right then. And I'm like, oh. So we crawl, because I had made this candle, right? Like I get, like, during the pandemic, you want to be on the side of the chooser of the slain. That's what you want to decide. So one of the first batches of candles I made was this like cinnamon and clove candle. It's black. It's got this raven skull on top of it. A little votive, right? And I'm like, okay, taking this into a cave. I'm gonna leave that there. I didn't lose anybody in the pandemic. I got real lucky. Fantastic. I'm leaving this candle there. And then we get into the cave and crawl in there, and we get all the way in the back, and he says, Daniel says, this is one of the 3 darkest places on this whole island. And if everybody, there's like 5 or 6 of us that made the trip in there. If everybody can just turn off your lights for a second. We turn off the lights, and you can't see anything. You can hear the water dripping, but you can't see anything. Pitch, just
oh my goodness,
beautiful pitch black. And he explains that back in the Iron Age, they used to send the royal children into this cave. Like they would send them in, and then the idea was you would come out transformed, right? You would go in a child, come out a man. It's one of those rites of passage kind of things. So I'm sitting there in the dark. I'm like, I'm not sure that I believe that, monsters and demons and whatever can crawl out of this hole once a year. But I understand why Iron Age people would believe that, because it makes total sense while I'm in this cave. Like, it really does. And then I decided that I'm not going to leave the candle in there, because the whole point of it is the darkness, right? And leaving a source of light in there would be bad, right? That's the beauty of it, is how dark it is. So I still have that candle. I have marked it so I don't accidentally burn it, but that's the cave that I took. That's the candle I took into the Cave of Cats and brought out with me. And I'm not going to say I don't feel a little bit transformed for having done it myself, but I do recommend it. They get like 22,000 visitors a year to this thing, and not all of them go in the hole. So yeah, it was a beautiful.
That's the Cave of Cats. Wow, now I see why you wanted to tell me about that.
It was a beautiful metaphysical experience.
That's amazing.
Mom waited in the truck.
She missed out. When you returned back to Houston, you joined the Houston Paranormal Research Group, right?
I did. Have we talked about that before?
You brought it up briefly,
Okay.
but you didn't go into much detail. I know that after your experience in South Carolina, you knew that there wasn't and correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't really a support group there for you.
That's correct. And I wanted one, and I wanted one for other people. Um, and I wanted my own evidence of either my own insanity or the paranormal. So I Googled it, and they came up, and it was a good group of people. Really are. The first night, I mean, before then, I had done my own, like, hey, this hotel's haunted, let's go stay there kind of things. But this was my first organized with a group. And they aren't still active. But I remember the first case, they took us out to Katy, Texas. I was corresponding over text with them about this thing. And my ex-wife comes over and looks at my phone, and she says, what are you looking at? And I said, oh, this is the inner thigh of this high school girl. And she's like, what? And I said, no, look, there's a handprint. They want me to see the handprint because there's like something attacked her in her room. And she's like, stop doing this. But so yeah, there was this 17, 18-year-old girl who had handprints on her inner thighs from having grabbed her when she was in bed. And the mother reached out and sent these photos, which were not obscene, except if you put that, like, this is the inner thigh of a high school girl. Otherwise, it's just a bruise. But so we drive out there. It's my first, official paranormal hunt, right? I mean, I lived with them for a long time, and I did my own hotel nonsense. But so I've got all this gear, right? The EMF detectors, the laser thermometer, the voice recorders, multiple kinds. The whole, there's all the gear, right? So I can either get a fanny pack. So I'm thinking, I don't want a fanny pack. Like, I want to do that. But I want to look cool, like, for this new paranormal group, because we've never really gotten together in real life. So I get on Amazon and I order this tactical assault vest, right? It's got all these pockets all over it. It's black. It's got like Velcro all over it. And I load it all with the gear and everything. And it looks, and I climb out of my little adorable car when I get to the place, and, everybody gets there at the same time. I climb out. I pull on this tactical assault vest over my black t-shirt with my cargo pants, and we go up to the door, and the president of the paranormal group knocks on the door, and the mother answers the door, and then she only wants to talk to me because I look like I'm loaded for bear and a serious professional. It's my very first hunt ever. So I end up having most of the conversation with the mom, right? And they were all fine with it. They thought it was funny because I got all the information that they would normally get out of a client in that kind of case, or a victim. And, it made her feel at ease that, it looked like I was a professional, ghost hunter. So costuming is important, I guess is what I'm saying. But, and that was a pretty standard ghost hunt. The mother thought that we asked, is there a boyfriend? God forbid, where's the father? And the father was overseas in the Middle East. He's an oil and gas guy. And there was no boyfriend in the picture. And she said that something would come out of the closet and attack her. And so the mother thought that it was the father's brother who drowned in Australia when they were children. And that was the ghost of the brother, the little girl's uncle, was following them around. And I was like, that doesn't sound right at all. There's a lot wrong with this. Why would you leave Australia other than spiders? So we do the call and answer thing, and the mother keeps asking, talking like it's the uncle, right, the long dead uncle, and it's not responding in a way that leads us to believe it's uncle. And then finally, one of the ladies in the group asks, why are you doing this to her? And you've been on these things where, everybody's sitting in a dark kid's bedroom at night playing this back right off the voice recorder to see if you can understand what it is that they're saying, right? And they play it back. Why are you doing this to this little girl? And the response when they play it is plain as day, right? I can hear it. It's like there's no distortion. I can just hear it. And everybody else in the room is like, I don't know, play it again. And they're like, they play it like half a dozen times, and I'm like, come on, somebody, it's right there. And and finally, I have to say, okay, look, if I say what it is, play it again and tell me if I'm wrong. And they're like, oh yeah, tell me what it is. And I say, it says because she's hot. They play it back and they're like, oh my god, that's exactly what he said. And then the mom's like, that's so inappropriate. That's your niece. And I'm like, it's not the uncle. Um, it was that was an interesting experience. A couple of weeks later, the little girl left for college, and it all stopped. So I don't know what that was. I was worried about the little sister for a little while, but it looks like that whatever it was just stopped.
So it just, the activity just ceased. It never, you guys never figured out what was causing it? It just,
No. We only did the one visit, and before we could schedule a follow up, she had gone to college and never had the problem again. So I don't know. I still don't know what that was. I do know that it was not her uncle.
well, there is that aspect of the poltergeist phenomenon where it's tied to the target.
Yeah, and usually a young girl.
Yeah. So maybe it was an aspect of that. Maybe it was coming from internal at her. She was maybe manifesting some of these. Again, we can only speculate, right? But
Right.
that's really interesting. Well, let's get into your tattoo, because that was one of the things that kind of annoyed the group, right? Or frustrated them.
That did annoy the group. Okay, so there's a ghost show on where they do this. It is investigation in this house in Mineral Wells, Texas, right? Um, they talk a little bit about the Crazy Water Hotel, and then they go across the street to this little house. Okay, so the Houston Paranormal Research Group investigated that house when it was still being remodeled. So we were there first. We drove 4 hours up to Mineral Wells to do this overnight in this house. And this house is, you got every reason in the world to be haunted, right? It was there was a beheading in the front yard. Children were stolen by Native Americans. There was a brothel for a little while. They had while it was a brothel, there was a deformed baby born that they just put in the attic to die.
Oh my gosh.
It's got all of your textbook reasons to be haunted as hell, right? So we went there, we're excited. We talked to the guy that owns it. He's an archaeologist. And he's putting together, his wife won't stay in the house. He wanted to retire in this house, but he's trying to put together, and his wife won't visit it. So he has people in to investigate, and he found like an axe head, like an old rusted axe head in the middle of the living room floor one day, out of nowhere, while he's doing this remodeling. So we go there, and I had gotten this as part of my healing process. I had gotten this Seal of Solomon tattoo on my chest, right, and it's for protection from the paranormal. And it was just therapeutic, I guess, for me to get that.
To those who are not familiar with the Seal of Solomon, what is this?
It's not Solomon old, but it's pretty old system of manipulation of the spiritual world, done through sigils and sacred writings and geometry, basically. So this one is it's a pentacle. It's got the names of 5 archangels that are specifically supposed to be good against supernatural or demons, and then the 4-syllable word for the name of God around that. It's done in the right colors, the traditional colors, but it does look like a big giant pentagram on my chest. I later on added some stuff to it so that I could. Okay, anyways, so I get that, and we go into this house, which is objectively supposed to be haunted. Like there's zero chance there's no activity, right? I spent 4 hours in that attic with the lights off. The attic where the baby died. I spent 4 hours in that attic. I went through all the crawl space. We went through, multiple batteries on all of the devices and didn't get a single hit nothing, not anything. And they blamed my tattoo.
It ruined all the fun for them. Huh?
It did. So I stopped getting invited to those things.
Look, some groups, they're in it for the thrill. You obviously got into it for the right reasons to help people, but you learned a lot through those experiences, and
I really
you learned.
did. And I've had some spooky things happen since I got the tattoo. So, it's not 100% effective. I saw a ghost at the Hotel Galvez. I saw one at the Ott Hotel in Liberty. Um, yeah, I mean, it's all in intention, I think, as far as the tattoo goes.
Interesting. You're working on a novel at the moment. What's that
I
about?
am. So it's called Haint Blue, which is a color, and they in houses in the southeast, very often the front porch, the ceiling, the roof of that would be painted this haint blue, and it's supposed to deter evil spirits. They're supposed to see it as the sky and just go. Um, so the novel itself is about this ruggedly handsome IT security consultant who hunts ghosts.
Interesting. Based on somebody
Uh,
you know.
oh no! It's entirely fictional. No, I'm taking some of my stories from the various haunted hotels uh, and stringing them together into a longer form narrative. So I'm hoping to put enough realistic ghost hunting in there to make people happy, and then enough spooky nonsense to appeal to the horror crowd.
And speaking of the horror crowd, you've got a new. Well, let me inform the listeners: you're no stranger to creating podcasts. You've had two podcasts that I'm aware of, but now you have another one you're about to launch called Horrific, right?
Horrific, yes. We're going to talk about horror movies, and we're going to talk we're standard film review, but my angle is going to be to tie that into the traditional folklore, which makes it scary. So, what traditional story is this based on? Because there's nothing new. What is it that taps into that primal fear and makes this movie work, or does it poorly and not work? So you'll be doing that, and horror reviews, new and old movies. But it's with my friend who we did the Two Lone Wolves podcast with before. So we're rebooting that into something that's got a little more solid format. And that was a little more free form than either of us are comfortable with. This is going to be standard movie reviews, and we should be recording our first episode this week.
RX. Is that the
Rex, yeah,
yeah,
Rex,
Rex?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Lila.
She had a fantastic podcast voice because I remember doing that show.
She does. She's got that NPR thing like you got going on, man.
Well, what else can we look to see from you in the future besides the podcast, besides the novel? Are you going to? Would you ever consider setting up your own paranormal group?
I have considered it. I'm thinking about it. So this September, I'm taking a group of friends who are not paranormal enthusiasts back to the Yacht Hotel. We're going to go to Tejas Barbecue first because they have good barbecue, and because the owner says that it's super haunted. They're going to let us stay there overnight if we want to do an investigation. I went to the men's room and saw something in the mirror that was not actually there. So I'm intrigued because this was the middle of the day. And then we're going to go to the Ott. And I stayed at the Ott with my buddy Joe years ago. And the Ott is a very old hotel. Right on the railroad tracks. It was where traveling salesmen would stop back in the 20s and 30s. And when we stayed there, it was so old that they didn't even take credit cards. It was like you had to pay $35 cash to stay in a room, which tells you how nice it was. Anyways, they also cater to the paranormal crowd because the front bedroom where we stayed, a woman was cheating on her husband, and there was a knock at the door. The woman opened the door, and the husband was there and shot her dead right there. So Joe and I stayed there one night, and we went to the next door room, and we were doing the whole call and answer thing, and we were using the spirit box, and then we did that thing, where you go, "Hey, here's a flashlight. If you hear, turn it on." and it turned it on. Right, that was the only time I've ever had that actually work. Was at the Odd Hotel. Um, but then it got to be 2, 3 in the morning. We got kind of sleepy. He laid down. We went to the room where the woman was murdered. Um, he sprawls out on the bed, puts a movie on the laptop or whatever. I'm sitting in the chair, and then a couple hours later, I wake up and I'm sprawled in front of that door right where that woman was shot. And I have no idea how I got there.
What?
Yeah, I'd moved from the chair across the room, foot facing the door, just sprawled out like I had been shot in front of the door.
And you were I have to ask, you were completely sober.
We were sober. We had nothing to drink, nothing at all.
Do you ever wonder, like, I mean, given what you've been through, that you're putting yourself in harm's way here, that you're putting yourself in a danger with these situations, with these paranormal places? I mean,
I mean,
you're now seeking it out.
I'm now seeking it out. Yeah, I want to see if something can frighten me again, and so far, no. Not wood. I don't. You know, at some point I got to think I may be some kind of magnet for this kind of nonsense. And then if that's the case, then I may as well learn something while I'm doing it. And if I can help people, because like that feeling I had for 2.5 years when I thought I was crazy was one of the least pleasant feelings of my life. And if I can make that not the case for someone else, even a total stranger, then maybe it makes it a little bit worth it,
Okay.
So, yeah.
When you're talking about this subject, I mean, you brought up earlier that these things, there's always that possibility that this activity can follow you. When you're just talking about this, do you ever experience weird things taking place just simply by talking about it?
Um, I don't know if it's my imagination or not, but every time I talk about the haunting in South Carolina, that night when I get in bed, I feel something jump up on the mattress, and
Really?
it could very well be my imagination. Let's hope it is, but that's as far as it goes, and it's every time I tell that story.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. So tonight,
Tonight that will be happening. Yes.
oh my gosh. See, I wish you would have told me this ahead of time because we maybe I would have thought twice about doing this interview. This is a strange phenomenon. It has so many different aspects to it. I don't know, even talking about it, discussing it years later now, since we had our first conversation, I still don't have answers as to why this took place. I have thoughts, I have theories, just as you do, but we never get any definitive answers. Doesn't that drive you crazy?
I just want it to not be a raw nerve anymore. I've kind of given up on figuring out what it was. I don't think we're meant to know what it is. I'm going to still try and figure out what I'm still trying to figure it out, but I don't really have any illusions about the possibility of getting those concrete answers. And it gets to the point where you do this long enough, and that there was a picture from the Odd Hotel that the owner had where there's a staircase, and they had decided for some reason that if they glued jigsaw puzzles up on the wall, that it made the ghost or whatever it was not as creepy or whatever. So this little girl's walking down the stairs, and her dad's at the top of the stairs, and he says, "Hey," and she looks up, and he takes a picture of her. Right. So this picture is on the owner's computer now, and there's fluorescent writing on her forehead on the image itself that was obviously not there. It looks like a laser pointer just dug into her forehead, and it just says FUCK just right across the forehead. And I'm like, okay, I can't really explain this. I mean, the lady doesn't do computers well enough to take credit cards, so it's not like she photoshopped this. This is just for some reason this image. But then you're like, what if they did Photoshop it? So is there a piece of evidence that you can get that's going to make everybody believe all of a sudden? I don't know that there is. If we don't find a full Bigfoot corpse with a social security card on it, are we going to believe in it? I don't know that we are. I would like to believe that Bigfoot's real because he sounds like a real nice guy.
This brings up another question that I totally forgot to ask you. When you're going through the experience in South Carolina, and you're thinking that you're going crazy, did it ever occur to you, hey, maybe I should try to take a photo of this, try to actually get the evidence to,
No,
or no?
no.
Oh,
I was out of that house when I got my first piece of paranormal equipment, and I did take, I took a number of pictures in the house, just of things in the house. I went through some of them years ago, and I think that there were a few orbs that showed up occasionally, but I tend to think those are generally dust. Um, I discount that kind of stuff. I took pictures of the paint bleeding a light color through a dark color because I was pissed about it. But I didn't start really digging into the research until just before we moved out of the house because I didn't want to do any of that. I didn't want to, I didn't want that in my search history. I didn't want to admit that this was a problem that was outside of my own head. But after that, I went all in. I had I had laser stuff and all the, it looks like Ghostbusters in the living room. I don't get to use it as often as I'd like to, which is why I'm looking forward to going back to the yacht. But
would you ever consider going back to the property?
no, no,
No.
hard no,
Hmm.
no. Um, that was a bad time for me, even without the haunting. So I don't know. I get occasional job notices for hey, why don't you come to Columbia, South Carolina? And I'm always, oh no, I've been there. No, no, thank you. I've been there. Um,
Okay. What about unusual events that have taken place in your life that you can't categorize, that you can't chalk up to as a definitive ghost experience, a paranormal experience, but unusual situations where it's left you kind of scratching your head like, what was that?
I've seen. I remember when I was a kid, I was staying at my grandmother's house in Louisiana, and I was sleeping in my mother's old bedroom from when she was a little girl, and there was this rocking chair next to the bed, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night, totally dark, totally silent house, and looking over and seeing a woman in a white dress sitting in that rocking chair, just watching me sleep, and she was luminescent, and I remember she was just watching me sleep, and I was 7 or 8, and I wasn't afraid of that at all. Um, I didn't think that that was strange at all. I just rolled back over and went back to sleep. And I think I mentioned it to my mom, and she mentioned the same thing from when she was a little kid in the same room. So but that's been years, years and years. But I really think that was the only paranormal experience I ever had, if it was paranormal, um, before everything blew up.
What about after this? Like, besides with the Houston Paranormal Research Group?
I've sought it out, So I went to the Galvez on Halloween a couple of years ago, with a friend, and we stayed on the haunted floor. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Galvez, but it was there was a hurricane in 1903, I think, and anyway, a bunch of nuns and orphans drowned, like right on the site where the hotel is. Um, Again, it's got every reason to be haunted. And I sat up in the room. My friend fell asleep. But I sat up in the room playing with all my paranormal gear and everything, and then I went to bed, and the foot of the bed was about even with the bathroom in the room, and then bathroom door opened onto this mirror, so I could see um, the bathroom through this mirror when I was laying in bed. And several times in the night, I woke up and I could see someone in the bathroom, like watching the bed through the mirror, like a dark figure. And I should have freaked out about that, I should have gotten up and investigated, but it happened 3 or 4 times in the night. There would be a noise. I'd wake up, I'd look in the mirror, and I would see that person in the bathroom, and then I would go back to sleep. So I don't know. God, again, a knock wood. I don't know if it affects me the same way it used to. I don't know if this kind of stuff has the ability to freak me out anymore, and that's why whenever we did stuff with the Houston Paranormal Research Group, again, there's another one called Society. That's not the same people. If you look that up, there's a different group. But they would put me. They put me in that attic for 4 hours. They put me in all the crawl spaces. I would get into the basements and I would dig around through all the yeah. This is where we found the human remains. Okay, I'll hang out here for 4 hours because it doesn't. I was the one that could do that without urinating constantly.
Yeah, well, you
So
said it completely ruined that part of your.
yeah, I can just sit there and just I sat there and talked to that dead baby for 4 hours and um, didn't get anything. Didn't I can. It's not like I don't have feelings. I can be sad about it. I can see that it's tragic. I can be socially anxious for sure. Um, General anxiety. Yeah, that gland's working just great. It's that primal fear thing just doesn't fire anymore. And I don't know if it'll come back. It could. Um, it's very there's a genetic disorder that causes the same thing, um, but mine is from trauma. So there's not a lot of research into whether or not that grows back.
What type of advice do you have for listeners of the show who have maybe gone through a similar situation or maybe going through a similar situation? What's your best advice that you can give them?
Talk about it. Share your experience. Find a group of people that are open-minded enough to not dismiss your experiences, and um, and try to help other people because that's been the best thing for me. If you can mitigate someone else's trauma, then it heals your own better than anything else I've found.
Wise words. And I'm so grateful that you came on this show and decided to share your experience again. Retell it through your own words instead of through my writing. It resonates more when people can hear it through your voice. So
I am
thank you
honored to
for.
have been asked, and it's very nice to finally see you.
I
So
know, right? After all these, I can't believe we
years,
haven't done this. Yeah, I can't
I
believe we
know.
haven't done this earlier. Like this is just, it's a no brainer. But sometimes we take things for granted, right?
Right?
And I'm sure even prior to these experiences, there was a lot you probably took for granted,
Oh yeah,
but you endured it. It taught you something different about the human experience, about your life. And maybe that's why it took place, you know?
maybe. I'd like to think there was a reason, but otherwise the randomness just creeps me out.
Well, would you be the same person that you are today had it not been that experience?
Definitely not. No, but I don't know that I would be a worse person. I would, we're all broken in different ways, and I know how mine is. I can point to several events and go, hey, this is what did that. That's it takes a level of self reflection that most people don't normally get. But I've spent a lot of time on this, so yeah, uh,
Interesting.
I'm not going back.
Yeah. Yeah. No more South Carolina. That's it.
Yeah, I've had enough character development. Thank you.
No vacations out there. No.
No, no.
What's the furthest you would get to South Carolina?
Um, I don't want to go to either Carolina. I think we have too many of them. I I went to Atlanta a few weeks ago for the Shanky D's Music Festival, and that was great. Love Atlanta. Um, I might go to Savannah. Um, Otherwise, yeah, Atlanta's probably as close as I'm gonna get. Maybe DC. I got some friends in DC.
We have some listeners of the show that are from that area in Georgia, and they'll love hearing about that. So
Oh, I love Atlanta. I love Savannah. Beautiful places. We had the best time in Atlanta. It was great. Beautiful people.
amazing story, my friend. And I tell you, every time I talk with you, it's a pleasure, and I learned so much about the phenomenon and about you. So I thank you
Oh,
for that.
well, I appreciate you asking me on, Justin. Thank you very much.
Well, good luck with everything. Good luck with the podcast. Once it's launched, please let me know, and I will post links in the show notes so that people can find you. I'll help promote that. If there's any, are there any other ways that people can get in touch with you, or would you rather stay off the grid at this point?
I'm this aspect of my life I tend to keep very personal. But if you've got somebody in contact with you that needs me, then please let them reach out. You know how.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Well, that's all I got now. So
Great. Thank you, Justin.
you have been listening to Terror Signals with Justin Bamforth and presented by Normal Paranormal. For more on this show and other topics of high strangeness, please visit normalparanormal.org or visit the program website at terrorsignals.com.